Today, we're going to use new satellite images to analyze how much damage America's Bunker Buster Bombs did to Iran's underground nuclear program, exactly how many of Iran's ballistic missile launchers they have left, and we'll map out the kind of tactics the US military used in this massive air campaign. Because the answer of whether or not these bombs are actually capable of destroying deep mountainous bunkers has enormous consequences far beyond just Iran.
See, there's been debate all day over whether the U.S. actually fully destroyed the Iranian nuclear facilities and the enriched uranium.
More or less destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, probably not forever, but certainly put it back a long way.
So Iran recently developed air base can also withstand those bunker buster missiles.
Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated.
First, let's look at the accuracy of these strikes. Take a look at this satellite image of the 12 GBU-57 Bunker Buster Bomb hits at Iran's Fordow nuclear enrichment site. This reveals a lot. You can see there are two groups of 3 impact craters. Even though we only see 6 holes here, there were actually 12 GBU-57s dropped, because 2 bombs were launched into each hole. It's like throwing a dart on top of another dart, except the dart is guided by GPS system from 9.5 miles up in the sky. Take a look at the location. See how the impact craters are in a linear north to south alignment. This strike pattern suggests to me that American intelligence had a systematic knowledge of the underground facility. The Washington Post spoke with Wes Bryant, who's an expert on satellite imagery and the former chief at the Pentagon Civilian Protection Center of Excellence. He said the B-2 bombers targeted a 250-meter-long part of the facility that contains the centrifuges used to enrich uranium. The B-2s achieved this by specifically targeting the ventilation shafts. Yes, just like that scene from Star Wars where Luke Skywalker fires a bolt at the thermal exhaust port to blow up the Death Star, and then people would later joke about how why would they design the Death Star to have such an obvious weakness, but in reality, that's actually lore accurate to IRL life. But sorting through the geopolitical side of this topic has been insane, because I get a different version of events depending on which outlet I'm looking at. And that's exactly why I partnered with Ground News for this episode, because they're the best tool for me to stay objective with my reporting. Ground News is an app and a website that pulls in news coverage from around the world and puts it in one place, so I could see how every angle of a story is being told. The first thing I did with this episode was I used their search toolbar on their website, typed in the Iran-US war, and found this article titled "Trump is open to regime change in Iran." With Ground News, they do the vetting for you. I can see and choose which sources stick closest to the facts, with the highest factuality rating that they give. The color-coded layout allows me to easily see their bias, and sometimes I want to see the far left and far right in what they're saying. Because I believe in Ground News so much, we're offering you 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for my research. Just go click the link in the description or go to ground.news/CappyArmy or scan the QR code up here. It's one of the biggest discounts they've ever offered, and it knocks the price down to just $5 a month. If you want to support the channel and get a clearer understanding of the world, try out Ground News. Iran's Fordow nuclear site needs these vulnerable ventilation shafts for 2 reasons. Because it needs to suck in air and remove carbon dioxide so people can breathe underground, and number 2, because it needs to vent out tons of heat and hot air that nuclear centrifuge halls generate. If the heat isn't expelled, it'll fry the machinery, just like how your computer with its RTX 5090 graphics card needs 7 types of water fans to cool it down. This is the same here. It's true in nuclear facilities too. These vents are only a few meters wide, they're tiny targets, and they're often disguised and hidden. It's like my old squad leader used to always say to me, "Stop making Star Wars analogies, you're a loser." Joseph Rogers at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Project on Nuclear Issues, said the reason that you'd want to target a ventilation shaft is that it's a more direct route to the core components of the underground facility. Take a look at this satellite image. Now look at the blowout pattern from the explosion that tells us a ton. See how the discoloration of the soil extends from the crater. Translation, the soil is disturbed up to 200 meters away from the central impact. What that tells us is the subterranean shockwave traveled at least 200 meters through the facility. I feel sorry for the guy that got his degree in geology, not expecting to become a Fed doing battle damage assessment for the Pentagon. Jerry Lewis at the Middlebury Institute James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies spoke to Wired magazine and said, quote, "They're probably not trying to get all the way into the facility. They're probably just trying to get close enough to it and crush it with a shockwave. If you send a big enough shockwave through the facility, it's going to kill people, break stuff, damage the integrity of it." Why does this picture look not safe for work? I should call her. But it doesn't tell us if it went deep enough to penetrate the enrichment center. To analyze that, we'll have to look elsewhere. Take a look at this before and after photo of more of the bunker buster impacts, and it tells us something interesting. The disturbed terrain here looks like white bluish gray soil, which is an indicator that pressure from collapsed tunnels sent debris flying out of the vents and tunnels. Because when an underground void collapses, the pressure vents out debris. Like how when you break glass of a window from the outside and there's evidence of glass on the inside, you know, like in every Forensic Files episode ever, we note a deep sinkhole is visible also on the eastern side, and this is what we would expect to see when the blast cavity of a slumped tunnel occurs. The answer of whether these bombs work or not is extremely important. It'll have profound consequences for the future of US power and the current strategy for warfare. Because North Korea and China have invested heavily, spent billions of dollars and years of effort into a strategy designed almost entirely around digging deep underground to avoid these kind of bombs that only America is capable of delivering. Whether these bombs worked or not sends a very different message to our adversaries. If the damage was extensive, it demonstrates mountain bunkers in North Korea and China aren't immune from US air power, and it'll be a strong deterrent. However, if the damage from these bunker busters was lackluster, like a 2 out of 10 weak sauce, then it could have the exact opposite effect, which is why I think it's so important that we analyze this battle damage. The cat is now officially out of the bag one way or another, so let's hope that they worked. There were likely only around 50 of these GBU-57s ever produced for the entire US Air Force arsenal. That's all public knowledge that they've revealed based on production contracts. Jerry Lewis said, quote, "The US military relies on basically a computer model which tells them how much pressure it could take before it would severely damage everything inside and maybe even collapse the facility. The US didn't need bombs capable of penetrating the full 260 feet to cause substantial damage. The bunker busters were tested against reinforced concrete that's resistant to 5,000 psi. However, Iran used a more resistant type that can withstand 15,000 psi. What we don't see here in these images, though, tells us just as much as what we do see. Absent is any Iranian air defense assets, which were already destroyed by the Israeli and US airstrikes. But can we really draw any conclusion of how effective Russian air defense equipment is against American stealth fighters? Maybe, maybe not. We're talking about export versions of a lot of this equipment, and we're talking about an entirely different military using it. I mean, Ukraine has effectively used Russian-produced S-300 air defense. It's just tough for us to say a lot about that. Absent is any large-scale recovery or repair effort. I can see there is some activity on the road with vehicles there, which means Iran's agents are already on the ground assessing the damage. But my absolute favorite way to get open source intelligence isn't from satellite images, it's from people with cell phones on the ground and people gabbing. The Iranians on the ground looking at the results of the bombings will inevitably communicate with their leadership the extent of the damage, and those communications will eventually be intercepted by signals, intelligence, intercepting radio transmissions, or by human intelligence. American CIA spies will channel that information back to US officials. If you want to get an idea of just how much the CIA has penetrated the Middle East, just check out my last video on the unhinged operations that the CIA pulled off there recently. But what are the public statements from each government? It's always kind of hilarious to see what government officials are saying these days when they have to lie in the face of overwhelming visual satellite imagery. It's worth it to look at these though, because the public statements from each government and their officials can give us clues as to how effective these strikes were. Iran's own energy agency confirmed that access is compromised. Meanwhile, statements from US officials claim Fordow is now off the table for enrichment. However, privately there have been doubts within the Pentagon that the GBU-57 might not actually be enough to reach the main hull of the Fordow facility. Iran insists that their core facility is still intact, but it's not like they're exactly letting inspectors in to vet that claim. The Iranian regime's official statements dispute the damage. For example, Hassan Abedini, the deputy political head of Iran's state broadcaster, said they already evacuated the 3 sites a while ago, saying, quote, "The enrichment uranium reserves have been transferred from the nuclear centers, and there are no materials left there that, if targeted, would cause radiation and be harmful to our compatriots," end quote.
Well, the Iranians claim they were able to move all of their enriched uranium to a safe place before the U.S. bombing this weekend. But General McKenzie pointed out to me that it is very difficult to move radiated material around without being detected.
Some evidence of this comes from Israeli officials speaking to the New York Times. They said it appeared that Iran had moved equipment, including uranium, from the site ahead of time. These satellite images from Maxar confirmed the 17 trucks arrived before the attack and then left. These dump trucks could also be trying to fill in the tunnel entrances to prevent damage from the bomb. Usually in battle damage assessment in BDA, you're looking for how many enemy were KIA, but in this case, amazingly, the Iranian Red Crescent reported that no human casualties from any of the American strikes because all these facilities had been evacuated beforehand. Meanwhile, from 400 kilometers to the south, American submarines launched a massive wave of 300 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Esfahan nuclear site location to destroy the remaining buildings and knock it out for good. But wait a second, is there a risk of radiation after the attack? Since the US targeted enrichment sites instead of something like an active reactor or a weapon stockpile, there isn't really a risk of that. Operation Midnight Hammer used considerable resources, including 120 US Air Force fighter jets, E-18 Growler electronic warfare jammers, and civilians on the ground in Iran reported major cell phone, GPS, and other communications interruptions in the area. I've seen that happen firsthand when I was in Ukraine. You're just looking at your phone, looking at the map 1 second, and then the next second shows your location some 300 miles away or something. It's kind of spooky. Aircraft carriers are also headed to the region, with 3 of them going there, so escalation is still on the table, boys. And with all these combined over 500,000 pounds of munitions dropped on Iran, it appears their nuclear program has been, at the very least, knocked back years and possibly even completely destroyed, or as they say in 2025, it's been unalive. But how many Iranian ballistic missile launchers are still operational after a ton of them were targeted by Israeli fighter jets? People don't realize it, but this is a giant bottleneck for Iran's retaliation, because even though they have 2,000 missiles that can reach Israel, they only have about 300 TELs or mobile launchers that can actually fire them. An account by the name of El Musk on X did the dirty work of compiling a list of all the video and photographic evidence of each destroyed launcher. This is the kind of open source information that makes me want to say hua unironically. The list shows Israel has destroyed at least 54 Iranian ballistic missile launchers. You might say, well, they have 250 left, no problem, right? We have to keep in mind that a bunch of these are decoys and older, smaller ones that can't fire missiles that reach Israel. And that kind of reduction explains why their retaliation has been lowered from 150 missiles launched per day down to about 10 launched per day. The way the kill chain works is wild. When Iran fires one of these missiles, the heat signature is located and instantly picked up by American satellites. That GPS targeting data is then transferred to an Israeli warplane that starts hunting for them and then deletes them in the world's highest stakes game of cat and mouse. You might say, well, Iran can just build more of these launchers really fast, right? They could just pump these puppies out. They're basically just trucks with hydraulic systems, right? Not necessarily. Sanctions against Iran mean that they have difficulty getting heavy-duty engine parts and machine tooling with the kind of tolerances they need to rebuild these launchers. Pretty soon, we're going to see them firing them off the back of Toyota Camrys. Iran isn't totally defanged yet, though. They're continuing drone and ballistic missile strikes against Israeli cities. Over 500 ballistic missiles have been lobbed at Israel so far. Most have been intercepted, but the total amount that they've impacted the ground so far has been estimated to be around 50 of those 500, which isn't exactly a great show of force. Iran's missile infrastructure has been heavily damaged. Iran was able to produce about 50 of their missiles per month before the war because they were trying to outpace the production of Israel's air defense. Now the calculations have been shifted, though. What we're seeing is a missile war of attrition instead of a war of attrition of manpower. We're watching to see who's going to run out of missiles first, Iran or Israel. After just a week of combat operations against Iran, Israel's stockpile of larger, more expensive Arrow interceptors are running low, according to the Wall Street Journal, and they've conducted an attack against a U.S. military base in Qatar. The U.S. had already evacuated that air base in Qatar on June 17th, and Iran knew that when they chose to attack it, so they weren't trying to destroy much as just tell their domestic audience that, hey, we've retaliated, and now, hey, can we stop this war, please? Osanet Defender, who has 1.4 million followers on X, wrote his assessment of Iran's retaliation, saying, quote, "Iran once again shows how pathetic and incapable they actually are." And if that's really the case, that would explain why the New York Times is saying Iran is looking for an off-ramp here, which is a diplomatic way of saying they're trying to say, peace, no more, time out, no tagbacks. If the United States really wanted regime change, what would happen next would be bombing of their water facilities, electric power companies, knocking out their entire country's communication networks. After that, we would see them hit transportation, like their bridges and airfields would get KO'd, which would prevent Iranian leadership from even leaving the country. After that, the American air power would target shipping ports and shut off their economy by stopping oil from leaving the country. This would destabilize the nation so badly that the United States would hope that the people would revolt, or that the leadership would flee to Russia, North Korea, or China, like how Assad ditched out and pieced out from Syria. By June 24th, there was some confusing whiplash back and forth over the possibility of a ceasefire. The US government stated that there was a complete ceasefire in effect. By the next morning, Iran and Israel had continued to bomb one another, and it was unclear if the ceasefire would hold. Remember to check out our top secret CIA mission in the Middle East, link in the description. If you're interested in the show notes and sources, go to cappyarmy.com, where you can get more content, and check out our new podcast called Simple Sabotage, and our Enhanced Interrogation World Tour t-shirt, now available on Bunker Branding. I'll see you later this week.